Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to our talk about Cosmic. The last talk before this was about Rust. If you enjoyed that, then I have a treat for you. Cosmic is a desktop environment written entirely in Rust. So we'll start off just talking about why we decided to make a new desktop environment. The story starts around 2019. We had our customers calling us. We were developing and shipping Pop! OS for quite some time, well, a couple of years at that point. And customers were contacting our technical support team, our sales team, and they were asking us how to install i3, if they could install i3 on Pop, if they could install Sway on their System76 laptop. And these were coming in pretty regularly. And then in 2019, I went out to Mountain View at Google, and it was for an open firmware conference. And at that conference, noticed that most of the people at the conference were using i3 or Sway. Clearly, in Pop! OS at that time, we were not delivering what our customers wanted and what our customers needed. Auto tiling or dynamic tiling was popular among our customers, and what we were shipping didn't include it. So at that point, we decided to build a GNOME shell called Pop Shell, or an extension called Pop Shell. Pop Shell added auto tiling to GNOME. And once we did that, we started shipping it, the calls stopped. Where people weren't asking for i3 or Sway anymore. We had solved a problem for our customers out of the box. Later on, as GNOME evolved and we learned more about what it was like to deliver a product using GNOME extensions, there are some inherent challenges to that. Any extension can override another extension. The quality and reliability of what we were delivering in Pop! OS could only go so far by developing extensions and delivering the features we wanted to deliver in that way. So we started thinking about building a DE, building our own desktop environment. It started with a pros and cons list. Our first one was, well, we can continue just doing extensions as we're doing them now. Well, we already knew some of the issues there, but it's also something we're already doing, so we can just continue that process. One of my major drawbacks to that was every 6 months there's a new GNOME shell release. A lot of our engineering time and the work we're doing is just keeping par, just keeping our extensions at the level that they're working each GNOME release. That means that all the engineering time and the development time isn't spent adding value for our users. It's just keeping us at par. And frankly, it's actually not very fun either. It's a lot more fun building new things. Another option was to fork GNOME shell and perhaps set up in a way where maybe extensions wouldn't be able to override each other. But the problem there is it's going to look like GNOME shell. It's going to feel like GNOME shell. Users are going to have the same expectations that we wouldn't be delivering. We're not going to be able to make our users happy that way. A third option was a Mutter plugin. We considered doing that and thought it would be technically feasible. We did some work on it and found that wasn't the case. Mutter, of course, being very, very tightly knit with the GNOME project, most of their considerations are what GNOME needs. The final option was, well, we could build a desktop from scratch. And we had, in 2017, I believe, we had standardized on Rust, so all new projects we were developing were developed in Rust at that point. And so we understood the value and how building something in Rust might build a far more robust, reliable desktop environment. We also knew that it was the hardest and most expensive option of the four that we could choose, but we knew we could build the best product, and so that's the route we took. Our first team, so then our discussion started in August 2021. We went through pros and cons, and when we made that decision, we decided what kind of team are we going to need to build this, and we began hiring the team that built Cosmic. In May of 2022, We brought the entire team together, of the engineers, the designers, the QA team, and documentation team, and we talked about what our objectives were for building Cosmic. We wanted to build a desktop that anyone could use to build their own user experiences. So that meant we wanted to build a desktop that was composable, a desktop that you could adapt if you're a distribution to your own branding, to your own user experience. You're closest to your users, and so we wanted to give distributions the power to adapt the desktop to what they were hearing from their users. Because although our users all wanted auto-tiling, that doesn't mean every user base wants auto-tiling. And I think one of the things that makes open source special is that we don't have to be one monolith system that we're shipping to everyone. We have hundreds of distros, and those distros all are close to their users and can build experiences for them. So the next step was for us to choose what technologies we were going to build Cosmic on. We built some of the features in GTK. We were used to doing that with Rust bindings already, so we built panels and some applets, and we tried different things. We looked at Flutter briefly. Ultimately, we decided we wanted a pure Rust desktop from the bottom up, meaning the toolkit as well. And so we looked at Slint. We knew people over at the Slint team who were building a Rust toolkit, and they're a great team. But we wanted also something that was licensed in a way that was much closer to our own beliefs in open source. And so we landed on Iced. At that time, Iced didn't have text rendering. There was no text rendering engine for Rust. It didn't have very basic features that were necessary to build a desktop. So not only did we choose the hardest and most expensive option, we just decided to add on top of that building a brand new toolkit to build our desktop as well. 3 years later, like I said, it was the right decision, even though it meant an incredible amount of work and effort. But now we have something beautiful built from the ground up, all in Rust. After we started those initial discussions or made this decision, and as we were hiring the team, the design team started with design experiments. We wanted to go through our user experience in apps to see if some of the concepts we thought would work across a number of different types of applications. These were just mock-ups. You can see in some ways they have kind of an older feel to them because they have this, this elevation and this three-dimensional feel to it. I really appreciate that. I liked it. It didn't make it in the end, as you'll see, but this is how we started. The concept was that an application window is like a pane of glass. That's how I thought of it. Perhaps a pane of smoked glass. And in that glass, different features were etched into it. So the header bar, as you can see, the buttons and the menus and these things are kind of etched into the surface. And then from each side, you have one side, a navigation bar comes up, and it's the standard location for objects that will navigate through an application. On the other side, we call it a context drawer. The context drawer opens information contextual to what you're doing at the time. That might be settings, that might be more information about a file that you're looking at. What's nice about this approach in application development or this pattern is that it enables us to bring more relevant information out without going deeper and deeper and deeper into different windows. So in settings, perhaps you might go into one layer of settings, and then you go into another layer of settings to set your keyboard shortcuts. Then you go into another layer of settings. With context menus, we can bring that out faster, and you're not getting nested as deep as you would in a lot of patterns that exist today. Cosmic is a design-first, professionally designed desktop environment. We built an entire design system. The design system describes what variable colors are used in what locations in the application, what kind of design patterns we use, how a text input works, how a button works, how a search bar works. All this was designed beforehand, before we started building it, while the engineering team was working on experimentation and determining the technologies we were going to use to build Cosmic. All right, you've probably seen this. What?
So we can just daisy chain up to 127 USB devices here. That's an everyday task. Let's plug it in. It's going to say, hey, I see you've plugged in a new device. and it's going to load in the appropriate drivers. You'll notice that this scanner build, whoa.
That's so fantastic. So this is alpha software. It might break, but that's all right. Okay, so here we have the Cosmic Desktop. I've come to prefer using a single bottom panel at the bottom of my desktop, but that's my personal way of doing it. Cosmic allows you to adapt the desktop to whatever your preferred workflow or style is. So what I'm going to start with is just some Cosmic applications. So we also have an application suite that's slowly replacing the GNOME applications that we were shipping by default. We have a file browser. We have a Cosmic App Store. We have a text editor. And text editor actually has some nice features for software development as well, including GitHub integration and other features of that nature. We have a terminal, and of course our settings application as well. Now, one of the UX patterns that we prefer when we were working through challenges our customers had was the Alt-Tab experience. In any operating system, you're probably familiar with kind of the pain of using Alt-Tab to try to get back to the application that you want. You might cycle through, and then you get past the application you want, and then you have to cycle all the way through again, or add Shift to go back to it. Well, with Cosmic, we center the experience around a launcher. You saw me launch applications with it, but when I open the launcher, I can now see all the applications that I have open. And if I want to go back up to the store, if I start typing store, it'll move me to that location and to enter that application. It doesn't matter what workspace it is on, what display it's on. If what I'm looking for, if I just type in the first few letters and enter, it'll jump me to that application that I was looking for. In Cosmic, we also have auto tiling, the feature that kind of started all of this. Auto tiling is done by workspace. So you can have one tiled workspace and you can have a floating workspace if that's the way you prefer to work. You can have workspaces per display. So this combination of different workspaces and tiling and floating and being able to separate them from monitors also means that maybe you have one display that has your communication stuff on it and you leave that floating, and then you have another one that might have browser and code editor and terminal and so forth all tiled. One of the things that we've done is try to make tiling more approachable to more people. There's a learning curve to jump into i3 and Sway. But with Pop! OS, we have easy to understand shortcuts. It's very easy to navigate and move windows. When you add a new window or a new application, you'll automatically tile in easily. And besides, and there's some people that are keyboard driven. I am, and a lot of our developers are, but there are a lot of customers that aren't. So we built tiling to work just as well if you want to use a mouse. You can grab a window and move it into any place within the tiled desktop. You can also stack windows, and now you have tabs of different windows, and then you grab them and pull them out. Besides tiling, theming and layout were really important to us. The intent of Cosmic is to give the world a platform to build user experiences. So to do so meant we needed to have a very robust theming system that allowed you to personalize it to both your own personal taste, or if you're a distribution, your distribution's branding, or your company's branding if you're building devices. So we'll make a few adjustments here. We'll move the panel to the top of the screen, and maybe we'll make it a bit smaller, perhaps. Each one of these that aren't opening. Each applet is a separate application. Here you can see the applets that are on my panel. I'm going to remove the app tray, remove minimize windows. Maybe I'll move the date and time to the center segment. And let's now add a dock to our desktop. And let's put the dock on the left, and let's extend the dock. And now it's starting to take on a bit of a Unity feel. Let's go a little bit further, and in appearance, let's import a new design here. Let's see, pictures. Here we go. Oh, wrong one. I have Ubuntu. We're going to start with Ubuntu Classic. It's been 20 years, right? And let's change the wallpaper. Now we have a bit more of an Ubuntu feel. I loved Wordy Warthog, Breezy Badger, and those kind of earthy tones that Ubuntu started with. So I think it's pretty attractive. We also have light mode. It always feels like it's really bright when it's turned on. Let's see. Talk. Okay. There we go. All right, and let's set the theme for the light version. There we go. My text editor didn't change color here though. All right. And here we have Ubuntu Classic. Now let's give it a more modern feel. We'll go back into settings and import a style that fits with the new Ubuntu branding. And fix our wallpaper as well. And there we have a light theme for the latest Ubuntu branding. So as you can see, between taking panels and being able to lay them out in any way that you want, and applets, if we open up System Monitor, for instance, and we look at, and we'll search for Cosmic, you see how many different processes are running. Each of the applets in the top of the panel and the applets on the side are all independent applications. You can write another applet to reproduce the Ubuntu experience. We all remember when you would click on the top left and an application menu would open and you could search, and there was the concept of lenses where you could add different sources that you could search through. That would be a relatively simple applet to write and produce that user experience here on Cosmic. What we've done is we've done the hard, lower-level engineering work to build a platform to make it easy to create custom user experiences. All right. And now I'll hand things over to Victoria. Victoria's going to talk more in depth about the hard engineering work and how we brought Cosmic together.
Yeah, hi. My name is Victoria. I started with the Cosmic engineering team basically right when Cosmic was kicking off. So I was no System76 employee before, but I was no stranger to the Wayland world. And of course, writing a new desktop these days, that's one of the technologies that you first look into. Because I was at the time for about 6 years or so working on a little side project of mine that is called Smithy. And that is a Wayland Compositor framework written in Rust. very similar to something like wroots. It actually started around the same time, but we had a lot less contributors, so wroots got a bigger head start with Sway and everything. But also, I was in brief contact with them, writing maybe Rust bindings for wroots instead or whatever. And we just figured that the design philosophies were a little bit different in various ways. So when you're writing a desktop on your own, which I was before I joined System76, you immediately notice that this is absolutely no small task, and there's absolutely no chance that you'll ever be done with it, right? The only way to get there eventually is by just building on the ecosystems that are already there. So my goals were, let's build something modular, something compatible, something composable, right? This is what every engineer really dreams of building. And then when I started working on Cosmic and suddenly had like a whole engineering team that shared the same vision and wanted to build the same thing, I figured, what if I could take these goals and still make them a reality? Wouldn't that also be a net benefit to what our desktop is going to look like in the end? And I really think that's the case because with the modularity, we can make it so much easier to work on all these different parts of the project in parallel. With compatibility, it meant we could use a bunch of components that already existed and were there, or use them as placeholders. For the longest time, we didn't have a proper screen locker, but if you just support the right protocols, you can just use Swaylock in the meantime. That's fine, right? Stuff like that. And in the end, we were also hoping to have something that's very composable, right? Everybody can just take the parts of Cosmic that they want, change them up to something else, use different things, and should still end up with, hopefully, a working desktop. But obviously, these were also the engineering goals. So let's start a little bit of a lower level and then slowly work our way up. This is an engineering talk overall, but I promise this is as technical as it's going to get. And talk a little bit about Smithy. Because we had a wonderful Rust talk just before this one, so it would be a shame to not chill on Rust a little bit more. And one of the things that I'm personally in Smithy really proud of is all the abstractions that we built. And I'm just going to take one single example. This is all the traits that make up our rendering pipeline. So if you want to write a renderer for Smithy, you can just implement a subset of all of these, and a bunch of functionality will be available depending on what traits you choose to implement and to provide. And this is not super unusual to other Compositor toolkits, right? They have rendering abstractions. Most of them just use OpenGLES, but there are some that start using Vulkan. Software rendering is, of course, a thing, and a bunch of other things. So it makes sense to abstract all of this away. I'm not saying Smithy is any special in that regard, but what I really think that Rust gives us at this point is how expressive these traits and their requirements and the constraints you're exposing can be through Rust's incredible type system. So the result is that I know that there's a bunch of out-of-tree renderers maintained by different people, sometimes proprietary, sometimes not for Smithy. And it's not like they are in our chat every day and complaining about that we broke some API and that their renderer is suddenly not working anymore, right? And the reasons for their custom renderers are many different ones. One example I can immediately think of is somebody doing work for a company with embedded systems, and they just have a little board that has a 2D accelerator. So no proper 3D engine. They can't just use OpenGL. They had to write their own renderer to get the performance that they wanted on that platform working with Smithy. And of course, Smithy also provides a bunch of implementation of these, most notably the GL one. But I think what is also really neat, and I wanted to quickly highlight here, is our multi-GPU renderer, which will just take different contexts from different GPUs, possibly even with different APIs, and in the background just manages all the shadow copies of frame buffers and of client buffers coming from different GPUs for you in the most performant way that it can find to do these things via DMA buff transfers in the best case, or just via memory copies in the worst case. And it just uses the same interfaces that you were already using when you were using the GL renderer before. So this is just plug and play, and suddenly you have a working compositor on complicated multi-GPU systems like the ones we ship at System76. And these kind of abstractions were really what drove Cosmic very quickly much further. We have then a bunch of new abstractions and layers sitting on top, like damage tracking and then render graphs and Once you're at that level, we even have a little abstraction that will take your render graph and try to put those things on overlay planes first before you continue composing everything down onto your primary plane, which is now a very specific KMS terminology. I'm very aware of that. But just being able to use these different layers and deciding, do I want this? Do I want to use the lower layer? Do I want to pick a different part of Smithy? Do I need to implement this out of tree? Really makes it possible for many different compositors that are based on Smithy to just pick and choose and use the same base technologies in some places and implement their complete own thing in different things for different things, and build completely different experiences. So it really lived up to everything I was hoping Smithy was going to be when I started this about 9 years ago. And then on the next level, we have our compositor, right? We are building a desktop, we need to write a compositor, and that is Cosmic Comp. And for that, we had the same kind of sets of goals. So what does that look like for a compositor? Well, that obviously means we need to support some common standards so people can interface with a compositor, because everything a compositor really does is I/O, and most importantly, IPC a lot of the time, right? We get a bunch of clients that want to output something, we need to combine that and send it to the display engine, and then we get input and we need to multiplex that again to a bunch of clients. So all we're doing is just shipping data through as quickly as possible with as low latency as possible. And that meant, if we wanted to be compatible with what's already there, to look at the other projects and the ecosystems that were already there, mainly the W roots. People already built like a nice namespace with the various protocols that we just straight up started adopting and using, and not had to think too much about the exact interactions between all the different binaries that we are shipping in the end, because the protocols were already laid out and we just had to maybe slightly tweak or extend them, but not invent everything from new. Most importantly, of course, something like the layer shell protocol, but also in smaller stuff like the output configuration protocol. And if you followed Cosmic a little bit, you might have seen that there's a Cosmic protocols repo though, right? What gives? Why does that even exist if we are so onto reusing stuff that's already there? Well, the most important point to make first is that we're constantly trying to upstream whatever is in there. When in protocols, sadly, takes a bit of time. I'm sitting there in the community as well, and doing upstream work as much as my time working on Cosmic allows. And those efforts have already paid off. We are mostly using existing proposals and just slap the Cosmic prefix while we are testing them in our desktop at first, then try to upstream it, and then just easily transition, hopefully, over to the new protocol. And one of these that recently finally got merged is X screen copy. So now we can just do a search and replace and remove Cosmic screen copy from all over our code base, use a new protocol, and everything's handy dandy, and we've established a new common standard, right? At least that's the theory. Sometimes we do have constraints where no other desktop shares our vision, so we have little tiny extension protocols. And the goal is to make at least all of those that still remain in the end, after Cosmic protocols shrunk as much as possible by upstreaming, optional, so that any component that might use these for additional functionality on Cosmic does not hard depend on any of these being available. So in the end, the goal really is to have no private APIs, no completely unstable protocols that nobody can really depend on, no hidden dbus interfaces that you need to look into the source code to understand how they actually work, but just have everything readily available for people that want to implement new components for Cosmic or just want to swap some components out. And I thought the best thing to show this actually off is to do a little bit more demos, because everybody loves demos, right? So we just quickly going to take a terminal here and do some stupid hacks so we can present with multiple computers. Don't worry about it. And here we have my Cosmic desktop. Nothing super special. Just have desktop icons enabled for people like that. I have a very minimal panel at the bottom. But that's actually not what I wanted to show you, so let's log right out of that session. Takes a little while. And and we select something completely different. And we are right back into Cosmic. Or should I say Cosway or whatever, because this is, of course, not Cosmic. This is Sway running all the Cosmic components with almost no modifications. I think I wrote about 80 lines or something to get this working on the train right here. And now we have Cosmic running on Sway. I can also start settings. Display configuration works because, of course, we're using the same protocol. I can go into the desktop settings, stuff that you've already seen. Say that I want my dock to be opaque or not opaque and translucent instead, or something like that. I can go into appearance setting. Now I could, of course, change the accent color, but that wouldn't really translate over to Sway. But of course it does, because I wrote a little daemon. So your accent colors get synced into the Sway configuration, and everything just seamlessly adopts, and now you can use Sway with Cosmic. But that's probably not super interesting, right? After all, we just heard from Carl how Cosmic's tiling was very much inspired by the tiling that A3 and Sway is doing. So let's try something else, right? Let's go back to the login screen. Let's quickly select something else. And, you know, we get a bunch of requests for, what about if we had scrolling tiling on Cosmic? And you know, for our UX developers, I imagine this is not a nice question, because they spend so much time in building out a good tiling UX, and now suddenly you should have a whole different tiling paradigm. How do you explain this to users? How do you make it easy to switch between these things? But I say let the designers figure this out. Maybe we'll support scrolling tiling at some point in version 4. Maybe we won't. No idea yet. But if you want scrolling tiling in the meantime, just use Neary. Neary is a perfectly fine project, also built on Smithy. I like it a lot. And then you suddenly have scrolling tiling working just fine on Cosmic. Mostly fine, I should say, because if you have a scale larger than 1, then somehow the panel breaks. I'm not super sure what's going on there. That only happens with Cosmic panel on Neary. It doesn't happen on other compositors, and it doesn't happen with other panels on Neary. But that's probably something for somebody to figure out in a single afternoon, right? And this is also a great point to make about this as being a very unsupported configuration of alpha software, right? So just let's exit this a different way. And when preparing these little demos, I thought, okay, but this is an Ubuntu conference. I can't just show off Sway. I can't just show off another Smithy compositor. I need to run this on Mir. Sorry, I still have a sore throat from an infection some weeks ago. And now this is Cosmic running on Mir. Unfortunately, the background daemon doesn't quite work, because Miracle, at least in the version that ships on Fedora, for some reason doesn't even support the viewporter protocol. Sorry, somebody of you will maybe have to fix this. Also, pop-ups on layer shell clients seem to be very interesting. As soon as I interact with this, the panel just crashes. But you know, the desktop icons work, and I can open Cosmic files from here, and I can open a terminal, and the launcher also appears. So this is as usable as it probably gets. All right. Great. Where did I leave the clicker? Here. All right. So this is hopefully going to show you that for something completely unsupported, you can pretty easily, on a completely different compositor, get a very usable desktop. And I think that's one of the staples where we can really show that Smithy delivers on its promises of compatibility, of composability, of modularity, by just showing that we can take a very, very core component of Cosmic, right? Something that I take much pride in and wrote for the last couple of years, and just replace it with something else, and everything still works. So this is the point where I do a little shadow drop. If you want to play around with these, this is the GitHub link. Just put it up yesterday, and you can run Cosmic on any compositor that implements a sane set of default protocols. Probably also on K1 if anyone who wants to give this a try. Sorry. All right, so let's take this another layer higher, because of course composability doesn't end on the technical way with a compositor, but we also have our panel. And Carl already said all of these things are different processes, so how does that work? Well, if you're a Wayland developer, every problem looks like it's solvable by another Wayland compositor. So obviously the panel is a nested Wayland compositor. All the clients you see there are just standard XCG shell clients. The panel just chooses to position them, its little icons in there, and when they open pop-ups, they just get forwarded to the host compositor. Like this means that you can write a new applet in basically any Wayland native toolkit. You don't have to use ICE, you don't have to use Rust, you don't have to use libcosmic. Just use whatever feels natural to you as a programming language. Sorry, I need to take a quick break. And this obviously also enables a bunch of other very fun use cases. People are already writing new applets, but system monitors, you're used to that. Every applet has these. This is easy to build for all of the different panels. But what about just taking your i3 status output and rendering it into a Cosmic panel? And now you got a very weird hybrid of what would be sway bar on Cosmic. But given these are normal Wayland clients, can it actually run Celeste? And yes, it can. One of our engineers, Ian, who I absolutely have to shout out here, took the first Wayland native game they found, which nicely was Celeste. And I don't know how they got this far into the game. But it obviously runs in the panel, and there's probably also some Doom port out there that will run if somebody wants to build this. And I think this is, again, a nice showcase of how Cosmic Panel really solidifies on our promises of compatibility and composability. So if you want to rebuild the Unity desktop with Cosmic, I hope this is the point where I convinced you that this is not super difficult. Or if you want to take and build Cosmic Mobile, hopefully that's not super difficult either. Or if you just happen to love the little workspace dots that GNOME gives you, and you don't like the workspace applet that Cosmic provides you, just re-implement it. Or if you want to run Cosmic on Sway and you are very bummed out by the fact that the workspace applet isn't working because there isn't a common protocol for this yet, we are working on it. Just write a different workspace applet that uses Sway IPC in the meantime and use that for the time being. It should just be a couple of hundred lines. How difficult really can it be, right? And that brings me to the last and final layer that I want to talk about, and that is Cosmic Config. And it's mind-boggling to me that we even have to talk about config on a desktop system as if it would be something special. But it's really just a very small little library and an optional daemon. The library by default just does notify and watches for changes of our config files. But if the daemon is there, that provides a little dbus interface, it will ask that to do all the watching and the notifications for it, right? So if you're running into file handle problems and too many open files on your system, just install the daemon and everything will be better. But you don't need it. Every application can just read and watch the config files and automatically reload them on its own. And of course, everything is atomic. As you might have guessed, it's all file-based. It's in the Rust object notion file format, which I think is not only human-readable, but also nicely human-writable, which is nice for the end user. And because it's file-based, you can also easily make backups, of course. Check it in a Git repository if you really want to. The important thing for distributions, of course, that it's layered, right? We have the system configuration, then we have user configuration on top where users can make changes and you can seamlessly update the system configuration without breaking their customizations. And then the last thing that we actually didn't need right now, but it is versioned, we so far didn't have to break any of our config files, but if we ever need to do this, there is a path forward and a path where we can migrate from version 1 configs to version 2 configs. And with that, hopefully you've seen how Cosmic is a platform First, for developers that want to build their own experiences and just use whatever is there, and then develop new applets, shell components for whatever is missing for them. For distros, they can just adopt different configurations, pick and choose what applets and components you want to ship in the end, and also provide branding through the custom configuration. And also, of course, for the end users that really can take this desktop and customize the heck out of it to make it their own. And with that, back to Carl.
You made it. All right. It's been a 3-year journey. We are getting close. We believe that there will be a beta release in January or February. As many of you know, when you have a beta release, it attracts a lot more users. I'm sure we're going to learn a lot at that point. Depending on how much we learn and how many things we've missed during the alpha releases, I would expect first release in February of March of next year. There will inevitably be things that we wanted to get in the first release that we didn't. So we plan to have a second release next year as well, where we'll fill in some of those gaps. After that, we plan to go to an annual release cycle for Cosmic. Very likely a release sometime in like the June or July timeframe each year. Cosmic is built for a bigger purpose. It is going to be the flagship experience for Pop! OS. But Cosmic is intended, built, designed, architected, organized, and developed to enable the world to create user experiences. To use this technology, to listen to your users, to your customers, to their needs, and be able to use this technology to deliver products and experiences that your customers and your users need. It's built to solve a problem that I think has existed for quite some time. We've been at this for 20 years. Ubuntu is 20 years old. We've built successful companies in open source. And even though we've done that, we've put all this work in for 20 years, we've still made a very small dent in the proprietary desktop world. I want to make a much larger dent. And I know that's not going to be possible following the path of Apple or following the path of Microsoft. The only way, or I think the best chance for this really hard problem, is to take a uniquely open source path, a path that embraces the GPL not just in license but in spirit. That means what we want to build are things that people can use to build with. If you think about the most successful open source projects, there are things like the Linux kernel, Apache, Ubuntu, various programming languages and platforms and React and so forth. They all have a similar characteristic. They're all used by people to build things. So we built a desktop environment meant for you to build things with it. That's why we made Cosmic. So thank you very much.
Chris, Victoria, thank you very much. It's the time when we can ask questions. And looking at the project that they just presented, there should be some questions. We have the mics on the left, on the right. Do we have any? Or should I break the ice? There is one. I see.
So you said you are aiming for yearly release of the Cosmic. Do you plan on sticking with Ubuntu LTS as a base, or also targeting the yearly .04 releases?
For Pop! OS, what I want to disclose now is that we will provide LTS releases in Pop! OS. We have plans for a different type of distro that we're not prepared to talk about yet. But there will be like the Pop! OS 2404, 2604, and so forth. Cosmic is very separate from Pop! OS, though. It's packaged for Fedora and Nix and Arch. It is on its own cycle that's separate from Pop! OS, and that will be annual, and then Pop! OS itself will have its own releases as well.
Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm. And can the panel run Doom?
Yes. Yes, it can.
see another question.
Carl, how does it feel for System76 to be not just a hardware company, but now a software company also?
That's a great question, because we've been a software company in many ways just as much as a hardware company, because hardware doesn't work without software. So writing drivers, we write firmware. Most of our laptops run core boot. What's unique about System76 is we have mechanical engineers, industrial designers, electrical engineers, firmware developers, operating system developers. We write code from the very lowest level all the way up to the desktop environment. So it's unique in that we have a perspective across the entire spectrum of how to build a computer in every way. So this is new in a lot of ways, but still experience that we've just added to over years.
Early on in the talk, you mentioned the difficulty of shipping user experiences based on GNOME APIs or GNOME abstractions as a motivation for Cosmic. And I know of kind of like the built-in mechanisms of the Wayland protocols and how people make decisions and how the protocols themselves provide this ability to provide components that can interop with each other. In some future scenario where like Cosmic customers want X and developers want Y, and it ends up becoming a question or a toss-up between stability or answering a customer's request, how do you see that playing out? How do you, I guess the question really becomes, how do you become more stable or more of a platform than GNOME is, given a customer focus that your company must abide by?
In Cosmic, you see in settings we have a panel and we have a dock. That's just because in our view, those are two, it gives the user a lot of different power and capability to create the layout and workflow that they want. In Cosmic, you can have as many panels as you want. If you're building a different type of device that might have layered panels for maybe an exercise bike that has a menu and then it has classes and it has different layers to it, you can build that with Cosmic, but you can, because the complexity and the capability is all in the background. But we don't have to expose all that through settings. Settings itself is also composable to a certain extent. We need to improve on that. But if you're a distribution that has a different mechanism for upgrading your distro, you might want to change out our software and updates page to a page that works for you. So I think Victoria can talk more about that too.
Yeah, I think on the technical side of these things, what we ship in Pop! OS will always be focused on our customers that receive Pop! OS with our machines, right? But with the modularity and with all the different components, we hope to keep maintenance costs low enough that if other parts of the community, be that other distributions, be that other parts that might want to run Cosmic or Neri or whatever, can just develop their components, stand alone, maintain them themselves. And so in that kind of way, we do really divide and conquer for all the components that we are developing internally, and we will at some point put on hold or replace components if we end up growing too many. And also divide and conquer by inviting other parts of the community to maintain the parts they are interested in that might not fit with what our view for our customers is. So I hope that answers that question at least a little bit.
A very specific question is, do you have a back and pack policy? Would you, if you want to make a change that would break a previous version, will you make that change?
That's a difficult question because it very much depends where in the layer it happens. For the protocols that we are support, I think we are very much set in stone of continuing to support them almost indefinitely and just trying to work with upstream if they're missing functionality that we need to add that or to write a little extension protocol rather than to replace the foundation that we built this on right now.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you both for your presentation. I thought it was extremely compelling. Our community, well, and I should also say that the sort of singularity of the vision is exactly the sort of thing that really blazes new trails, right? So our community is famous for being, both a technical construct and a social construct. And that's exhilarating in both senses and frustrating in both senses, right? I'm curious, as you look at the different communities that you work with as part of this exercise and others, where do you see, what are the areas where you think getting consensus or the social dynamics are most challenging? And I ask that not in the spirit of sort of throwing someone under the bus or so on, because, you know, we've got to talk about these things. But where do you find in the sort of stack that you find yourself most challenged in terms of getting other people on board with a singular vision? And what might make for a better set of constructs to achieve that in your view?
Right. Well, the most obvious one for me is application, not really portability, but the application ecosystem within Linux all feeling like they fit in with each other's desktops. That is probably because there are very different views throughout the community about theming, about appearance, about style. But I feel pretty strongly that we can build a Linux app ecosystem where a KDE app will look great on Cosmic, a Cosmic app will look great on GNOME, and throughout the community by collaborating on theming and styles, that we can build a more robust, more successful application ecosystem by ensuring they work together. I think this is going to be a challenge, and we have Cosmic as an example of how it can be done, and then it's I think up to us to get out to the other communities and talk about the interest and the value of our apps all working well and looking great on our respective desktops. I think Wayland is an area you work in quite a bit, and there's a lot of work to grow and build consensus there. Right?
I mean, that pretty much applies across the stack. You started with customization, but we were very much at least involved with the discussion around the accent color portal.
Mm-hmm.
So progress is slow when you have to work with other people because you need to reach a consensus, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And I hope we can be one of the contributors that just tries to mediate on contentious topics and in the end arrive at something that is workable for all of us. And I think the accent color portal is a really good example for that, even though it's just a very small piece of the puzzle and obviously not as themable as the full extent of what we provide in Cosmic is. But I think it's a really good core example of what we want to achieve in the long term there.
Right.
Thank you both. I think we're running out of time, but I hope you can find them around the summit if you have more questions.
Yeah. Thank you.